we're here to talk about the journey to becoming a staff engineer in a large tech company. And so we'll go through our intros and talk about which companies we have experience in just a minute. But just to give some context, I wanted to quickly share this diagram from levels of FYI. What does it mean to be a staff engineer? Staff engineer is a very senior level at these tech companies. So typically, you get to a senior level. That's a terminal level of being an individual contributor, an IC engineer. And so that's what you can look at here, which is senior suite L5 at Google, E5 at Facebook, SDE3 at Amazon. The level after that is typically what we're referring to when we talk about a staff engineer. So staff suite at Google is L6, E6 at Facebook. At Amazon, interestingly, there's no vocabulary for a staff engineer. The level after senior is principal. So keep that in mind. We talk about this from the perspective of staff engineer, but the vocabulary does differ based off of what company you're at. But generally, the idea of staff is that you have an influence and scope across multiple teams and perhaps even company-wide. So it is a very challenging level to perform at. And I think it'll be really valuable to hear from everyone here about how they achieve that and what advice they would have for everyone here. So to kick off the intros, does anyone want to start? Maybe Lee, do you want to kick us off?
So I'm Lee McKeeman. I have been working in some capacity in software engineering since 2004. That's when I finished an undergraduate degree. So worked at some smaller companies for a while, did healthcare informatics, did nonprofit fundraising stuff. And then starting in 2012, worked at Amazon, worked as an SDE2 there for a lot of the time. I moved into people management, got promoted to L6, which is equivalent to senior engineer as a manager. And then a couple of years ago, left Amazon, joined what was then Facebook, became Meta while I was there as an L6 engineer staff. They don't like title things, but same as staff level elsewhere. Didn't have a super fun time, didn't go great. So about a year and a half ago, moved over to Google in the same capacity, working as an IC as a staff engineer. I've worked on the chat product and now I'm over on Gmail working on notifications. I'm sure we'll give this general disclaimer, but I'm not speaking on behalf of Google. No one is speaking on behalf of their employers.
So my name is Ryan Peterman. I'm a staff engineer at Meta, and my prior experience is that I graduated from UCLA in 2017. I worked in a small satellite office at Amazon for around 8 months or so, and then I started at Meta at the new grad level, and since then I got promoted to staff in a few years. And I'm still at Meta right now working on the Instagram product.
I'm just going to note new college hire is L3 there. So that is 3 promotions in 5 years. So just pretty significant. Anyway, Ryan, you pick who goes next.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly right. L3 or IC3 or E3 for the new grad level. I'll pass it to Carly.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Hey, everyone. My name is Carly. I currently work at Activision. Same thing as Lee, not speaking on behalf of Activision, but I am currently a senior manager, but I also still hold an IC title, which is a fun time. So I do both. My IC title is equivalent to staff. We call it like lead engineer. Yeah, I guess I finished grad school in 2017, moved up from junior data scientist fairly quickly, started at Activision at the senior level, actually, and then took about 2 years to get up to lead. So it's been a fun ride making video games. I love it. I work in security, so there's a lot that I can't answer about specifics about my job, but I'm happy to give as many examples as I can.
You're not going to tell us how to write a around.
Oh, that would be great. All right, Zach.
All right. So for me, I started my journey in big tech at Facebook back when it was Facebook back in 2016, doing like data engineering kind of stuff. And I think I'm one of the ones here. I think me and Lee, I guess, are the ones who like did the journey like through a bunch of hops. But then I went to Netflix. I feel like Netflix is where I got to staff, but like back then, Netflix didn't have staff. Everyone was just a senior engineer. But what I was working on there was really crazy. I also worked in security like Carly when I worked at Netflix. And then I got the official staff title when I jumped to Airbnb. And there I worked for 2 years. I recently left. I left about 6 months ago. Now I'm doing like content full time. It's a fun gig. I've been liking it. Yeah, Rahul, you're next.
Yeah, all right. I'm Rahul. I am here in the Bay Area. Unlike everyone here, other than Zach, I do speak for my employer because my employer is me, Tara. I'm very transparent and open. I'm happy to be open about what was my experience like at Meta and Pinterest, which is where I work, and also my kind of perspective as a somewhat of an outsider now looking at these big tech companies. But I run Taro. My experience in terms of big tech is I was at Meta or Facebook for 4.5 years, which is where I went from senior to staff engineer. Prior to that, I was at Pinterest for 2.5 years. And fun fact there is that I actually got rejected. I got rejected for promotion twice at Pinterest. So I feel like I have certainly been on both sides of, as a manager and IC, I've been on both sides of getting promoted. And I've also been rejected multiple times from promotion. So happy to talk about that too. Prior to Pinterest, I was at a startup which got acquired by Pinterest. So that's another fun story. But yeah, I feel like we have tons of really smart people here and really eager to dive in.
I'll just chime in, like Rahul just mentioned, not getting promoted. At Amazon, I've tried to get promoted to senior SD 3 times and failed all of them. The first try to get to L6 as a manager failed. That happens. And also, like, talking to the people on this panel, like, a lot of people grew through these levels super fast, some changing companies, some being super successful within their company. Whereas, like, I was 17 years, 16 years into my career or something when I made it to this level. So it's not a race. Certainly, like, if you are succeeding and progressing through the levels, awesome. But I just want to also set the expectation that it's not like what you are hearing from some people here, and maybe all of us, might not be your path. So don't freak out if you've missed a senior promo the first try. Like, that's not a weird thing. So anyway.
Yeah, no, appreciate that input. We do have a lot of great perspective here. Old, young, not old, you're not old, more mature perspective and younger perspective and different companies and so on. So I'm super excited. Here's how it's going to work. We have a couple questions that we think will be broadly interesting to the 225 of you here. And then after we go through a couple of those, I think that'll probably take between 45 minutes or an hour. Then at the end, we will do open question. So you can raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute. Okay. So to get started, the first question that we have is, tell us about the main project or perhaps multiple projects that got you promoted to the staff level engineer. Anyone want to start here?
I'll go first. I think so. For me, I think there's 2 things there because I was at Netflix and the titles, everyone was just like senior, but I felt like I had staff responsibilities, and then I got promoted by a hopping company. So I think it was the Netflix project that Airbnb was like, okay, this guy's staff level, so I'm gonna, even though it wasn't a promote, I never really got promoted there. I got hired at another company. But anyways, going from that, I worked on this project at Netflix called Asset Inventory. And Netflix is famous for having this kind of microservice architecture. And one of the things that's awesome about microservices is you have this individual ownership. One of the things that's terrible about microservices is security. Because then it's, instead of having one app to hack, now there's 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 apps to hack that each could have their own different vulnerabilities and code-based problems. And that was one of the big nightmares that Netflix was trying to figure out. And the thing that I worked on there was like, I built this graph database that described all of the applications and code bases and data sets and employees at the company and how they're all connected and how they all interact with one another and the relationships between them. It's like this big ass knowledge graph of everything. And yeah, I worked on that for 2 years, and that was a project that was really intense. But I would say that was essentially what I worked on. That was like the thing that at least Airbnb saw. I was like, yeah, that's staff level.
Yeah, so I'll hop in next. I also wasn't promoted. I consider it's promoting yourself when you've done the work and you can convince someone else that you're there and get hired. That was the direction I went. But I had been managing people for 3 years at Amazon when I switched over to Facebook and at a staff level. And so what I would say is, like, doing the technical work was not enough. Like, being in a position to lead people and know how to do that, both as an IC and as a people manager, I think is something that some people overlook. There are times where people are like, I delivered this huge project and it had all this technical complexity. That's who else worked on it, or how did you plan that, and how did you parallelize those work streams? How did you, like, take risk prevention to make sure the hardest thing wasn't the last thing to get done and delay the project? And people are like, I didn't have to. I'm individually a genius and I delivered it all myself. And it's like, yeah, that's not necessarily meaning you're there yet. Managing people and learning to manage projects and work streams was a big part of it at Amazon. But before that, a lot of the work that I had done as an IC that I think put me in a position to speak about the technical complexity when getting these other jobs mostly had to do with Android internals. I was working on an app. I wasn't working on Android itself. I happened to be working on something that is part of Google Play Services, which is part of Android right now. But in any event, at the time, it was just like, we have these complicated apps and they don't fit essentially into the amount of, it was a method limit. I don't know how familiar people are, but I had to write something that had a custom class loader to allow us to use multiple executable files in an Android application before Google started supporting that and put out something that did that. And that was like the most technically complex thing that I had to do to allow Amazon Video, which was what I was working on. It's Prime Video now. And then like combination apps with the shopping app and the App Store and video, like all of these things in them, like it wouldn't work with just one. And we weren't going to tell engineers like, put all the functionality into one big method and have a switch statement on the like operation or something. Like we didn't want people to code dumb because of this technical limitation. So like overcoming that and not just like having a solution, but making it work and delivering that app that could continue to be extended was probably the like biggest tech project. I'll kick it to Ryan.
Yeah. And you mentioned an interesting thing, which is being brilliant and shipping everything yourself versus working in a team. For the staff level, this is one of the first levels where the baseline expectation is that you influence others to get large undertakings done. Actually built into the expectations of these levels is that you're a leader and that you're influencing people because software is inherently collaborative. And so about the project that got me promoted, this work was a large efficiency project. It made video processing at Instagram significantly cheaper, 94% cheaper for some of the basic encodings that we produce. And I think a large part of what made this project staff level and helped me get promoted was that I created this scope, which meant that I went and I found it. I convinced people it was a good idea. I got buy-in, and then I led the execution on it. And going back to if I executed on it personally, I would step in for the most critical components that added risk to the project. But in large part, this project was being executed on by several engineers, and I was leading and doing the code review to make sure everything came together in the end. It's not just me that worked on this project. There's a lot of other people that came together to make this happen. But I think the key here that makes it staff level is like the leadership and convincing everyone that it's a good idea and going forward. So I'll pass it to Carly.
Yeah, really interesting hearing all of you talk about your journeys because I've been thinking about this a lot with my team as well. And it seems like what it takes to get to the next level, like everyone has already said, is not just being technically brilliant, right? It really comes down to, in my opinion, influence and trust. For me, I was obviously working on a security project that's about as in detail as I go, but I had taken ownership of a decent chunk of a technical piece of this project. But what I think, and I had hired someone, so I had a direct report under me, and we were both kind of attacking this problem from multiple different angles. I think what set me apart and what led to my promotion to staff was a couple of different things. Number one, I can actually pinpoint it back to a presentation that I gave to an executive leader in our company based on some work that I had done and some findings that I had uncovered. And I think being able to speak technically to an audience that might not necessarily want to sit in an engineering meeting was something that really set me apart from some of the other people that they deal with who are working on highly technical, complicated problems and just coming across as a trusted collaborator. And so out of that meeting, I had an opportunity to switch. And so I didn't change companies, but I did do an internal move to get to staff. And that's how I landed where I'm at now. And so I was actually interviewing or presenting to someone in executive leadership and as well as our CTO. And he offered me a job working for him after that presentation. And so we were able to make that work. It was really exciting for me because it opened up a lot more doors for me. I don't say that to say that's normal. You're not going to go into the office of like Zuckerberg and kick down the door and be like, I'm staff now. But At the same time, you should be prepared at a moment's notice to be able to speak eloquently to your work. Exactly like what Lee said. You should know your numbers. You should be able to recite like the impact that you've had. And you need to be able to do this to technical and non-technical audiences. And oftentimes, the people who are making the decisions about whether or not you're ready to move to the next level are both. So it's not just the fact that you can, I don't know, do some crazy algorithm, that you can actually speak to it to a layman, make them understand and see value in your work. And I think that's where you tip yourself over the edge. And then, of course, there's all the collaborative nature of these projects, right? Like, it's not just enough to be like, oh, I built a machine learning model, right? Like in my case, it needs to be larger scale, collaborative across a couple different business units, something that obviously speaks to a pain point of the business, right? I think everyone here universally just described something that was problematic for their company. If you can solve those problems, like, you're going to be keyed up for success. All right. Are you going to be answering or just
Well,
listening?
I'll chime in here just because I feel like I have a couple things that I think might be helpful to people. And then for the future questions, just in the interest of throughput, we don't all have to answer. Just whoever wants to, they can, if they have something to say, they can answer. But for this one, I did want to add to the great answers we already heard. I think there were 2 projects that got me promoted to staff engineer at Meta. The first was actually an internal tool that helped the debuggability of the product I was working on. And I was able to quantify that it saved literally thousands of hours of engineering time throughout the course of the year. And it became effectively like a platform where other engineers could add in their own debuggability metrics, their own debuggability tooling into this kind of architecture or platform I'd built out. So it was really creating scope and allowing other people to plug in. That's a really powerful way to have multiplicative impact, right? And then on top of that, I had another project, which is what I would consider my main project, which is re-architecting something about the product I was working on. So the calling architecture, I was modernizing it to a different team that had a set of API. And that's actually one of the lessons I wanted to share, is that one way to think about getting promoted to these very high levels is to think about a portfolio of bets that you're making. So if you just have one project that you're so hell-bent on delivering, that's a good thing for the most part. But in a big tech company, there are a lot of things that frankly are not in your control. And so having one main project, which is what I did, along with one project, which was more of a internal tool or something that I had a lot more control over, that worked out really well because then both of them in tandem led to a huge amount of impact, right? And when you're blocked on one, you can work on the other. That's one thing I wanted to take away, or share as a takeaway, is that you can actually think about having maybe 2 or 3 projects, probably not 10, right? You want to have maybe 2 projects that you can kind of balance between. The other comment I wanted to make here is, like, I think Zach, you mentioned this, right? That you got hired in as a staff engineer at Airbnb. And that's another thing that's worth calling out, is that in addition to working hard and impressing all of your colleagues and having enough impact at your company, another core ingredient of getting promoted to a very senior level is there needs to be sufficient business need for that, right? There needs to be scope that you can fill in to be a staff engineer. And frankly, at some companies which are not growing quickly, they're stagnant, there may not be that scope. And so I think a lot of us are talking here about getting promoted internally. And I think that's certainly a really good thing, and we should all strive for that. But keep in mind that there's also an opportunity to get promoted simply by moving to a company where there's a need for your skill set.
Yeah. By the way, on the portfolio of bets, that's a really interesting point. If you look at any promo packet, it is a track record of multiple halves worth of work. So it's not usually you're doing great and all of a sudden you have a staff project and boom, you get promoted. You've usually been doing it for a while. You probably have some sort of track record so that when your packet goes to the promo committee, people are aware of your name and you've been doing near staff or at staff level work for some time.
Yeah, that is a great call out. One thing I just want to mention, I dropped a link similar to what Ryan did earlier. I dropped a link for a video that I put on Taro actually about a case study from my promotion story. So if that's interesting to folks, check that out. Unless there's anything else to add here, I'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, I think one thing I just want to add real quick about one of the things you said, Rahul, that I love is multiplicative impact. So I like to think of, if you're a staff engineer, or at least like when I've been working as a staff engineer, like I think of creating impact in two directions. You have like your vertical impact of the direct impact that you want to have on the business. And then you have a horizontal impact, which is how can I enable my team to move quicker? And how can I enable, what about the development process sucks? And how can we make the development process better? And thinking about not just what we are building, but how we are building it. And if you can if you can solve both those how problems and the what problems, that's when people are like, wow, this guy is really changing things and changing how things work. I know for me, that was like one of the other projects I worked on at Netflix was I decided I was like, I want to learn some Groovy script so I can learn how to cut deploy times down. So then on my team, I was able to write this Groovy script that cut down the jar files that we deployed for our pipelines, and it removed all the unused dependencies. And it made it so that depending on the project, they either saved 1 to 7 minutes per deploy, which saved on average, like an engineer is going to deploy probably 5 or 6 times a day when they're testing a pipeline. So it saves them like 30 minutes to an hour a day. That's a lot of like time that we get back. And then if you scale that out, then it's like more a matter of adoption than it is of technical excellence. Because then all you have to do is scale that out and get more people to adopt it. And then you're like, CEO, now I have 100 engineers working and using this. And then it's okay, wow, that's how you can really also get a lot of big impact as well.
Yeah. Actually, that's
But
a great.
also 66 people with a 16% increase is a 10x engineer. Like you don't do 10x yourself. 1% for 1,000 people, 10% for 100. That is where you actually make that kind of impact, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And I've studied some engineers that are the L9 level, which is 3 levels higher than we're discussing now. These people are legend. And I looked at the things that they do, and oftentimes they are just making compounding improvement that make all of Meta faster. And so imagine you make the tooling that everyone's using 10% better, and there's 5 figures worth of engineers. That's absurd impact. This definitely scales if you're thinking even past staff level, making other people faster in large organizations.
That's a great segue actually into a question that Brian had. And it was a question I wanted to ask as well. Brian wrote, for a staff engineer, they often will create or find their own scope or problem. But at the senior level, one level below, you still need to do the actual work of coding or implementing something. So how do you do both? I think the question, if I could rephrase it, is how do you think about balancing the art of delegating work versus doing it yourself?
I'll jump in here. I think that
Okay,
this reminds me a lot of conversations I had with my manager, Jen, when I worked at Airbnb, where each week we would talk about, are you managing enough? Are you delegating enough? Are you like working? Are you coding enough? And like to make sure that I was contributing in each bucket enough, because I'm definitely someone who likes to just nerd out and just like code Scala all day and just get into the nitty gritty details of wow, just really get geeking out. But then I do that. I've definitely been in that position where I do that to the detriment of my team. And that's like a problem where I know I need to be leaning more into leadership those weeks. And that's where having, at least for me, having just very frank conversations with my manager about how I'm spending my time makes me like, and then really taking her feedback in and understanding like, oh, like I am not leading enough and I need to be doing more leadership. At least for me, that's the bias. Depending on the staff engineer, you might have one who's, if a staff engineer is an engineer who came from management, they might have the bias the other way around where they're like peopling too much and they're not de-risking the technicals enough. So like you really want to learn your own biases depending on your background. And if you know what your own biases are, then you can like, try to adjust for them to get into that kind of sweet spot. And that might not be 50-50 each week. You might not be like, I did 2.5 days of leadership and 2.5 days of coding. Some weeks you might do 4 days of coding and 1 day of leadership. And it might be the other way around another week. It really depends on the balance that you're trying to look for.
But there's also like how you lead. If you're doing deep technical work, you might be leading by example. You might need to be sharing that out more. You might need to be pairing with some junior people to be divvying up work as you dive into it so they can follow some of the threads instead of you having to do it all yourself. But like leading, this is one of the things that I said when I was like moving back and forth between IC and management was like, am I leading from the front right now or am I leading from the back? Am I pointing people the direction they need to go, or am I up front and finding it and sending them down the path with me? And in terms of that, I think that you like how you lead it varies by team. None of this stuff is globally applicable. Some teams you're like amongst peers that are all about the same level as you. How you lead that team is way different than if it's all new grads and you're the only person that's been doing this for more than 20 minutes. Like how you lead. Yes, getting input from your manager can be really helpful because they can be like, yo, you spent the last 3 weeks and you did get that 4% performance improvement, and that's cool, but no one understands how you did it. No one knows what's going on. Like, you didn't tell anyone what tools you used. And if you were hit by a bus tomorrow, we wouldn't even get it committed. So like, how you do it is as or more important than what you do, I think. So
Yeah.
True, Lee. It makes me think of how I would manage Zach, which is actually terrifying because I think we would either have way too much fun or kill each other. But honestly, I think about with someone with Zach's talent, right? Like he's obviously incredibly successful and has the technical depth that most people don't. I would be remiss if I let him go deep technically every single day and no one really knows exactly what he's doing. Like the force multiplier for someone like Zach will be if I can get him into the R&D and design discussion, if I can make sure that he has input in all of the big projects that are going on, we understand roadmap and we have someone there who's gonna be like, that's going to break, that's going to get fucked up, that's going to work. And knowing being able to do that quickly, and then someone else can get into the deep into the skull and nerddom, depending on what it is, and he might need to step in and help if it's something really complicated. But I think that if I were in the position, that's what I would want from him because that's where he I think that would be the most effective use of his time. But it's hard because you also don't want to be in meetings all day, so it's a definite balance, something you have to talk to your manager about.
something that
Yep.
came out of what Carly just said is one of the most powerful tools is asking the right question at the right time. You being in the right place to hear someone say that they're going to re-architect something that you know will cost 3 years and a couple $1 million of dev time, like you saying that's not the right focus, we can put that behind a shim and we can deal with that later, can be the difference between successful projects and failing projects. If you don't have your senior most people involved in those discussions, they might call that out 3 or 4 months from now when you've already sunk like 2 or 3 dev years into something, and 20 minutes of their time could have prevented that. So like where you are applying these, I don't call people resources, but where you're applying these people's time, it can easily like, if they miss a hallway conversation, it can be costly. They can't be everywhere all at once, but knowing like this is going to be an important thing. This design matters. Like we need eyes on it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to just add in more on that because I like it really that triggered my like beginning experience at Airbnb. Because when I started there, they were like talking to me about we need to get these profitability numbers certified. We need to do it that way. And there was like that was like the stakeholders were really loud about that. And I was new. So I was like, okay, I trust you guys. Because when you're brand new at a company, you have to lean into stakeholder requests until you get the lay of the land yourself. And I realized after about 6 months there, like listening to these stakeholders and then learning like more about, and then I finally got the courage enough to ask, what is the fundamental difference if these numbers are certified or not? And like the answer to that was like essentially nothing, or there was like 1 day difference in delay, and that didn't have any like really strong fundamental impact on the business, whereas other things we could be working on would. And so I actually told my manager at the time, I was like, I spent 6 months on that where we had like all the seniors and me working on these, trying to get these numbers certified, but it's a very complicated pipeline that was not going to happen. And I was like, yo, this is like a diminishing return. I don't think we're going to like really get much value out of working on this longer and trying to push this to the finish line, even though the stakeholders were really loud about that. And then I was like, I think we should change to focus on other things that are going to have higher impact. And if you can explain the impact of things, like that can be awesome because sometimes that can also save you a lot of dev headache. Like what Lee was saying, if you could just show people how to prioritize things, then maybe you can work on things that you enjoy more too. Because those profitability metrics, those things almost ended me at Airbnb. It was so hard. But like
you and 3 people working on that probably for 4 months probably cost the company $1 million plus.
Exactly.
Just salary, not even like opportunity cost.
Totally. That's a sunk cost, not and what was the opportunity that we gave up for that. And that's a thing that I think is another big part about being a staff engineer is you need to be able to persuade and like convince. And it's because it's up to you. You're the leader here. Like you get to decide what to work on a lot of the time. Your manager leans on you to identify the impacts and identify what things should be worked on. And it's also up to you to recognize like what shouldn't be worked on, even if the stakeholders are loud about it, even if there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions that think that this is the right thing to do. So, and you need to have that courage to tell people like, nah, we're deprioritizing your thing, even though I know you're going to be mad about it. It doesn't matter. It's not the highest priority now. And I think that, being able to explain that thought process can be wonderful, and it helps your cross-functional partners respect you more, because especially if you deprioritize their project, but you don't have a clear line of reasoning for it, then you're going to build a lot more mistrust, and you're going to build a lot more kind of resentment, potentially like mistrust first, then resentment if it keeps happening. And I've seen that happen too, where team dynamics have fallen apart, right? Where these communications have not happened. And so that's definitely another skill that I think is very important for success as a staff engineer.
And one last thing to add. So I think, Lee, you spoke a little bit about the needs of the team and maybe the needs of the project. If there is a lot of senior people on the project, it's going to completely change things. But if there's a lot of hands working on execution, maybe you're more in a leadership capacity. One thing that I'd like to add is also it depends on your strengths as well. So there are some specialists or people who are ridiculously productive, where just them executing is worth like 4 or 5 engineers. Those people can have staff level impact by doing all the execution themselves. They're still expected to scale themselves by sharing their knowledge and those types of things, but they may be doing almost 100% of the execution themselves because they're ridiculously productive, or maybe they're a specialist and no one else can do their exact work. It depends. It depends on your strengths. Not everyone is a tech lead archetype. Some people are just heads down coder. Some people are domain specialists.
Yeah, isn't that the archetype you're describing there? I swear I remember at Meta when I was there, I was like, it was like the code monster
Like
archetype.
code
That was like
machine.
code machine.
Yeah, I love that
Yeah,
one.
for sure. That's great. For sure.
Yeah.
I relate to that a lot, for sure.
I don't think that we answered this question at all. I think we had a super interesting conversation, but I don't know that we answered like where you find and make up this scope. The thing is that gets bandied about because you start to get better than the people that are managing you at your job, and they can't find these things anymore. They can't know what the sort of landmines are in your project. They can't know what technical things are actually constraining projects anymore. And so that's where the like, you need to invent it is. Like, you don't need to make up something to get promoted. Like, that is a bad choice. You need to identify the things that are hurting and that are holding the team back, and raise those things up and convince people to get them done and do them. And that is where you're like inventing, quote unquote, this scope is. I consider it like, was calculus invented or discovered? Like, I would say it was discovered. And so are these like pieces of scope that you need to come up with. You may invent something brand new and convince people to do it, but most often you're discovering the things that must be done that either other people are afraid of, they don't see, they don't think are valuable, and you are in the position that you have to convince them that they are going to actually accelerate the next 3 projects if you take this on right now, or they're going to enable something that the product couldn't do before. So that, to me, like, I heard this a lot of, oh, it's up to you to find the scope. And it was like, that's not a cool thing. Where am I going to find this scope? And it like turns out that it is in the sort of either archaeology or discovery in the code or whatever, or not even code, like in product requirements, that you like find that there is a gap. And one of the big things that I've done throughout my career that sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't, is be the one that puts my hand up when no one else will. It's, oh, this old rickety system, it sucked. No one wants to work on it. We should probably turn it off. And it's, oh, you know what? Actually, that's generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. We probably shouldn't turn it off. We should probably find like Strangler fig pattern to gradually replace it with something modern or whatever. But no, we're not going to give up on this system or leave it to the analysts to try to keep it running. Like, it matters. So those sorts of things, again, sometimes you get stuck with something awful when you are doing that. But yeah, anyway, I'll be done.
Yeah, actually, I'll use that as a transition point to the next question. But just, Lee, I love what you said. I feel like one way of summarizing that is, if you're asking yourself the question, how do I find scope to justify my promotion to staff engineer? I feel like you've already lost. Like, that's the wrong question to ask. The correct question to ask is, what are the most burning problems in this org? What is the top of mind concern for my manager, director, other engineers on the team? And how can I build something or figure out a solution to this problem that will help everyone? And you can derive from that the necessary scope to get promoted. But if you start with, hey, how can I be like the village idiot stumbling around to find scope, you're probably not going to find it. It's like building a startup in some ways. You don't go out and say, like, what is the problem? Like, you don't start with a solution, you start with the problem. And then from there, you derive the solution. So you don't start with, okay, what is the system I want to build? It should be educated by the people you talk to. And part of talking to people is relationship building, right? Like, you have to be pretty embedded in the organization to figure out what those problems are. So that's the next question I wanted to bring up. At the end of the day, in a big tech organization, we have to be honest that there is some level of politics that when you go in for your performance review, you have to get a review from someone you might have mentored, maybe someone who's a tech lead or a manager on the team. And they're going to talk about, hey, here's what Ryan did in the past 6 months, and here's why it was exceptional. He should get promoted, or whatever the phrasing might be. And so I'm curious for all of you, how deliberate were you about that relationship building in terms of, hey, I'm going to find someone who I can mentor and they're going to write good things about me in my performance review, or vice versa. Like, here is a director who I really want to impress. They can say good things about me in performance review, either upward or downward. I'm curious how you all thought about relationship building.
It's the most important thing you can do. Hands down, at least in my experience.
How did you go about doing that, Carly? Were there one-on-ones that you set up recurring with different people, or how did you identify people who you wanted to really build that relationship with?
Usually it's people that I interact with who I think we have some sort of common approach or common problem, and we end up syncing up trying to solve something together. I will say that at my current organization, I have people that I would probably consider friends all over the org in various business units, people I probably don't even talk to every single day or interact with on a daily basis through my normal work. And people are always surprised to say, oh, I didn't know so. And I'm like, I know fucking. But that's part of it, right? That if you want to be seen as an expert within your organization, people need to know who you are from the hole in the wall. And like, if you hide all day, if you're remote, way harder. I love working remote, but I gotta say, doing that while I've been remote full time at Activision since I started was significantly more difficult than when I was in an office for a trial. And so it was extremely intentional. It was finding commonalities with people, striking up friendships. Like, the day's lonely if you don't have people you can like shit talk with on Slack too. So a lot of it is just for fun, because what are we all here doing if not trying to get through our days? But then those people are the ones that you can rely on when you need something, and they know that they can rely on you as well. And so if you're super introverted, I totally get it. I'd say that I'm probably an introverted extrovert. You need to go against every fiber in your being that's telling you, like, don't talk to this person, don't DM them, don't bother them, they don't want to talk to you, and really try to build those relationships, because you're never going to thrive in your career if nobody knows who you are, because who is going to step up and say that you're great at anything? That person doesn't exist. No one's going to come to your rescue and see you heads down at 10 p.m. on Slack just because your little thing is green and say, holy moly, Zach deserves a promotion. No, they're going to say Zach deserves a promotion because everyone knows that he's a rock star, because in every meeting, he's absolutely killing it. He's delivering, he's showing up, delivering his timelines. Everything is on scope. Everything is within budget, right? Like, all of those things come to the table, and you need those people vouching for you. So thinking that someone's going to save you is the wrong approach. And I see a lot of people doing that. Like, one day they'll notice me, right? No.
If only I put in another 70-hour week,
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
for sure will know that I'm a
It's
cool person.
it's always
and give me
that,
a
isn't
medal
it?
or a trophy. Like,
Yeah, your code will not speak for itself. Your code will not speak for itself.
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to networking or getting people to know your work, I did a really bad job of going to happy hours. And I think even when we were in person and building relationships, I didn't do a super good job, but my work was very visible, and I got the promotion even during COVID. So I think this might apply for people who are asking about how to get the promotion while remote. And really, the number one thing is that you communicate your work, the plan, get buy-in, you tell people how great the results were. I know in an ideal world, you just have impact. You don't need to tell people for it to matter, but that's not how promotions work. People need to know who you are, how good your work was. That's why communication and writing are really exceptional tools if you're looking to grow your career, because it's not enough to quietly have the impact. And in theory, if you are doing such a good job, your work will market itself, but it's always helpful to put
But
the
it
extra
can't.
work in.
Your code and your work cannot advocate on your behalf to people. Like maybe if it's an internal tool, people are using it and your name is on it. Like maybe, but maybe your manager can be your cheerleader, but eventually you're going to run out. Like they will not be able to do it for you anymore. For me, like being known is been the biggest difference between stuck at L5, never going to get anywhere, to I'm pulling together Android engineers from across Amazon, asking if they've had this same problem, giving them the data on when their app is about to run out of methods and saying, we've got to fix this. Does anyone else have anything? Okay, reader team, you moved Lucene to a separate DEX file so you could use that, but that's the only thing and you only did it like this and it's super self-contained. Okay, cool. That's one step, but what else are we going to do? And then whenever there's something going on, it's, oh, hey, yeah, I know who's on the app store that worked on that. Go talk to them. Being able to be the person people go to, and if you don't know the answer, you can give them a single step from you to the answer. That's incredibly useful. And this sounds like, oh, you're just like being a social butterfly. No, like human relationships are all there is. None of this matters without that, whether it's the relationship with our customers, our users, our coworkers, those that we're supporting that are, underneath us, whether we're managers or not. Like that is all that matters. No one is going to remember that cool for loop you wrote 10 years from now. They're going to remember the time that like you introduced them to the right person to get them the opportunity that they needed, or that you gave them the advice that avoided them like getting stuck in a horrible project. Like that's what matters. It is all people. So for me, like I am remote. I didn't go and visit when I was at Meta at all. And I failed. Like I did not succeed there. I had decent relationships with the people I was supporting and they thought I was a cool person, but it didn't matter. Like I didn't have the visibility. I didn't have the relationships. I didn't have the relationships once things started going bad to get the help I needed to dig my way out. I had a mentor and he was like, what you're doing is great. I don't know why the team is like this. And that was it. I didn't have anyone else. Meeting people, I will say this is also like a scaling thing where we've talked about going broad. I've started like when I was at Amazon with my own team, asking one like off-topic question every day during the pandemic. And now since then that hybrid and remote work is normal, just so we have something to talk about, just so we're like engaging with each other socially. And now I've moved from the chat organization to the Gmail organization. All of the chat organization and all of Gmail front end, I now in 2 different rooms ask this question every day and engage with people. I will run into people when I'm in Sunnyvale. It's, hey, you're the question person. It's, hell yeah, I'm the question person. You don't know anything else about me. You don't even know I'm a software engineer, but my name. And if I came to you, I was like, hey, you're a PM in the spaces org and I need help with this, they'd be like, oh yeah, I know you, let's talk, and not find a time on my calendar next month. So it does not have to be that you are working on a project together, that you build a relationship with someone. Like you can say like to a manager, hey, is there anyone on your team that needs a mentor? Like even if the answer is no, you asking that question changed how they think about you. Like you going and hanging out with the PMs at one meeting during their summit just to understand their process and see if you can contribute and say, hey, if you had a dev representative here, it might be really helpful. Or if you like at this stage brought someone in, it could change the way that we approach like writing our stories or whatever process you use. And then all the PMs are like, that's a cool person. I like them. And it has changed the dynamic and changed your sort of social cachet in a significant way. And I know some people are like, this sounds like politics or playing a game. And what I will say is maybe it does, and it's not all bad. Sometimes you have to play the game, and playing games is fun sometimes. I will also note that I am an autistic person, and I have lots of social challenges, and yet I have found out that if I don't do this, I cannot succeed. I've got to figure it out. And sometimes I figure that out by finding ways to be a weirdo and bringing people into the weirdness. That works too. Just
Yeah.
do it. Make
We
friends.
love the weirdness.
There's so much. I want to add two things. There's so much good knowledge being dropped here. If you all are getting value out of this, just to give us some feedback, can you just drop a reaction, a thumbs up, heart, just to let us know if this is resonating? Two things I want to add. Just so much good stuff that just was said. One thing that Lee mentioned, I think a good litmus test for if you are getting staff level or any kind of seniority in your company is if I go to your teammate and say, hey, what is this person? What is Ryan known for in the team or in the organization? And they can't tell me cohesively, okay, here's what Ryan did. Here's what Lee did. Here's what Carly did. That's a bad sign. Like they should say, hey, oh, Ryan is a person, he's the expert on this system. If I have a question about that, I have a bug, I have a concern, he can help me out. That is, I think, a really good way of evaluating if you've built up that brand, that credibility among your team or org. So I think that's one thing I wanted to call out. The other thing is there were a couple comments, like Sean said, what happened to modesty in this day and age? So my rebuttal to that, Sean, is don't think of this as self-promotion. Like, I did this project, let me go tell everyone how awesome I am. That's not the right way to view it, in my opinion. The correct way to view it is, hey, the work I've done has value to you as my teammate. I can make your life better. I can make the company more money. I can make our end users happier and experience fewer bugs. There's value in the work I'm doing. And therefore, I would like you to be informed of how you can benefit from my work. For example, this debuggability thing that I built at Meta, it was a big part of my promotion. I built a tool that improved how quickly you could debug issues in the product I worked on. When I went out and talked about it, I said, hey, here's a tool that will make your life easier. And in fact, I have a way for you to also get impact on your performance review. This is going to help you and it'll help the product. It'll help everyone. And so one way to think about it is, what is a call to action? You're not going out just to pat yourself on the back. You're trying to go out there and say, hey, here are ways you can get plugged in. Here are ways that you can help yourself or you can help the team. And it happens to be the work that I did because the work I did is valuable and I want to tell you about it. So that's how I would reframe this idea of self-promotion.
I can tell you're a
completely
startup founder. You were made for it.
I completely support sex work, so this isn't a negative thing, but you sharing knowledge is not prostitution. You sharing knowledge has mutual benefit. It helps everyone for you to say, this is the thing I did. It was hard when I tried it this way, and it only worked when I did this. I ran into a problem over here, and this is how I solved it. If you need to build something like this, the first thing I did was build a lower level framework for it that you can share. Like, changes the usefulness of your work. It is not like shameless bragging. You're not like wearing a medal. You can wear a medal if you want, but like, you are not just doing it to show off. You're doing it because it matters and like your work is important.
Yeah, and you're preventing future pain too. I don't know. I feel like sometimes engineers feel like the only way to learn things is the hard way, through debugging and crying. And if you share your knowledge, there's another way that you can maybe teach people, right? You can teach people through all sorts of different ways. And I definitely think that's a big thing where it's, okay, I think that there's a difference here, but it's an interesting line between like bragging and teaching, where I think that's the line that some people like feel like they might be crossing sometimes as an engineer. But I know if you ever do a lunch and learn when you're teaching people stuff, like there's going to be engineers who don't know this stuff. I know whenever I did the lunch and learns or when I sat in on them, I'm like, wow, I just learned like 10 things. And most engineers are curious, open-minded, tenacious people, because if you're in big tech, they select for those traits a lot of the time. So they're going to want to hear what you have to say anyways.
Let you learn someone can be doing a demo and that they have a browser extension that makes it so much easier. And like, what the hell? Where did you? And they're like, oh yeah, I wrote that thing. I only use it. And it's like, can you post it? Can you share that? Because that's rad. Like, you just, like, someone's sharing their screen for 15 minutes can change the way you look at doing work. And they may not know it's a cool thing. So I don't know. There's lots of ways that like sharing is caring, and so do it.
Cool. So we have half an hour left. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I have one more question I'd love to get your input on. We can try and keep it relatively short, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And then for the remaining 20, 25 minutes, I'd love to open up to the audience and see if there's a burning question we can answer from the crowd. But the last question on my end is, what heuristics can you tell us about that optimize the chance for promotion, especially to the staff level engineer? And what I mean by that is, when you think about a team or an org which is likely to get you promoted, do you think about, oh, I want to go to a team which is very junior heavy, very senior heavy, small, large team? How about infrastructure team versus product team? That's a really interesting thing where I think a lot of people in industry talk about how there's a front end feeling. It's actually harder to have multiplicative impact when you're doing a widget on the Android app compared to if you're building back end infrastructure, which is impacting hundreds of engineers. So I'm curious for each of you, what heuristics do you have to think about where it's more likely to get that staff level promotion?
Talk to someone that's above staff level, senior staff or principal. Ask them what in this org they would fix if they had more time, and then do that. They know where the problems are. They don't have the time to do all of it. You fix a problem that they had a problem with, and you have a principal writing support on your promo document, that's going to go a long way. Beyond that, find out what's missing. Submit a document before it's ready, or at least have people that are on the committees that review them or managers that review them, whatever the process is at your company. Write your doc right now, not when you think it's ready. Write it right now and take it to people and say, why would you reject this? And then start working on that. You may not be able to get that work right away. Your manager may not buy in on it, whatever. But if you don't know what you're missing and you think this project that you're about to work on is your promo project and you do it and it's not, you're going to be pissed and it's your fault. If you didn't find out beforehand if it actually matters and if you're actually missing it. So find out, oh, you know what? No, all the projects you've done are great, but we've never seen you lead anyone. We've never seen you present anything. Then you're like, oh shit, this next project, I don't need to write a bunch of code. I need to be the one that makes it better and makes it sure it's on time and that other people say, yeah, we were able to knock that out of the park because this person was leading it. But if you're going blind, you will not figure out, you will not happen your way into the promotion. The process itself is beastly. And if you don't understand it, you're not going to get promoted. And if you think I'm not a manager, I don't need to understand it, then you probably aren't going to get promoted unless your manager is an incredible person. And that happens sometimes, but that is luck. That is not something that you can affect.
I think we all wish we were our mentor now. I think I do. I follow churn. That's my jam. At every company I've worked at, I always do. Those are where my projects, I over-index on that. So pain point in the business, always. So dealing with churn for most of the companies I've been at, we rely on subscribers, users, whatever. So yeah, I always try to solve something related to churn, something financial for the business. And that's where I've always gone.
I think for me, I think that there's a couple of different heuristics that I like to think about, for if you're going to get promoted and all that stuff. I always think that the number one heuristic that Rahul, I think is missing here is your relationship with your manager. If you don't have a good relationship with your manager, it's going to be hard. It's just going to, even if you're the most rock star, amazing guy ever, it's not going to happen. But when I think about big teams, small teams, stuff like that, data engineering has a different perspective here a little bit, where it's the data sets that you're using and creating as a data engineer, there better be 30 other pipelines that read from it. If there's not, it's not going to be staff level engineer. You got to have, you're not creating the data set that is used to make a viz. You need to be making the data set that then everyone else makes other data sets with. You got to create that master data. If you're not creating master data, you're not a staff data engineer. And you might be a staff analytics engineer if you do things end to end, where you do logging to data set to viz and maybe ML model, and you have all 4 of those, and you go more horizontally like that. Then that's another way that you can potentially be staff level. But at least for the data engineer family, if you aren't creating master data and not servicing a lot of teams with that master data, you're probably not at that staff level yet.
And for me, I would draw the heuristics from the rubric that everyone uses to discuss what is staff and higher scope. And typically, like when we talk about those projects, there's three heuristics. Like typically, how large is the size of the work stream? It's usually quantified with the number of engineers involved, the duration, the complexity of the work stream. Can someone in the level below you not solve that problem for some reason, whether it's like some specific domain expertise on distributed systems or AI or something like that? And then the last thing is like the actual impact of the effort. Is it spanning multiple teams? Is it achieving like significant business goals for the org? And so the reason that I mentioned this is because I think like what Zach was mentioning is like talking about getting leverage by building data sets that everyone else is using. That means that this is going to have a lot more impact because you're making one data set here and then everyone's building on top of it. So you're one level higher up in this, leveraged impact that you can get. If there's opportunities for you to build things that are enabling others to build on top of them, that's going to get you more of that leveraged impact. Or if you're building tooling or anything like that. So that will bias a little bit more towards the infrastructure teams if you're going that route. If you're trying to go for like the workstream size route, there's limited spot for that. If you want to be the main lead in charge of this massive product initiative, let's say that's 50 people involved, there's only one spot for that top person to be the, main tech lead. So those
And
roles are a
you
little
being
bit
the
more
senior
limited.
engineer and not like a staff or principal engineer that gets picked to do that, like why would they trust you with it? And maybe you've built up the like credentials and maybe you've built up the trust, but you're like right there at the promotion point. Like you probably don't need that project to get promoted if they're willing to hand it to you. I don't know. That's a rough one.
Yeah, exactly. Those types of promotions require permission. Someone's got to say, hey, you're the person in charge. So there's less of those roles available and they're harder to compete for, but there's definitely some opportunities. But most of these really senior engineers I see are more on the infrastructure side or tooling and it's specifically because of that leveraged impact. If you're building on that bottom layer, you're making everyone better.
I want to kick it to live questions, but I just want to say this infra thing and backend thing to me is a legacy bias. We just don't know as much what it looks like for people to perform at this level in other places. We've seen what it looks like for backend systems to support billions of users. And there's lots of people that understand that and the complexity. When you're working on, it's better now, but if 10 years ago you were working on an Android app, no one knew what it looked like for a senior staff engineer to be doing that work. What is the difference between what they're doing with this application and what someone else would be doing? They're like tremendously complex apps. Billions of people might be using them, but no one really quite understands what principal front-end engineer or something does. And so if no one can judge it and no one can measure it, you better switch to a back-end team so you can get your promo, which is bullshit, but it has been a real thing. So
that's very true also in data engineering. I've noticed that like when I was working at Facebook in 2016, there was one staff data engineer. Now there's tons, but this is because data engineering was very new. Like data engineering was like maybe 5 years old at that point in 2016. And so there wasn't like a lot of good definition of what those roles look like. And then now there's probably dozens and dozens of staff data engineers at Facebook. But back then there was literally one.
Yeah. One thing I just want to add is the infrastructure bias doesn't necessarily mean front end versus back end. There are engineers that build client side infrastructure, like maybe the build system that's used on Android, or maybe there's some framework that is used to manage requests between the client and server. And so that could still be on the front end, but it's still infrastructure, like product infrastructure. The key is that you have the other engineers that are leveraging what you build. And that's usually one layer lower than the person who's building the user facing experience, unless you're one of those Uber tech lead building some new product.
Before we open it up to the audience, anyone else want to mention anything? Otherwise, the way it'll work is there should be a raise hand functionality in Zoom. So if you want to ask a question, you can go ahead now and raise your hand.
Hey, thank you for the discussion. Wondering if you have any advice. I'm already at staff level. What would you recommend to with regard to performance management? I'm finding that exceeding expectations at this level is becoming harder and harder. That's my question.
I can speak a little bit about that. So it sounds like you're talking about senior staff. Once you get to the staff level, senior staff and higher, The behaviors are actually very similar. You are influencing through others. You are growing other people around you, and you're often taking on the largest problems in your org. The number one thing that changes is just that the initiatives you take on are one step bigger, or one step more impactful, or something like that. So it depends on your specific org, or are you an infrastructure engineer, or what exactly? But you just need to do exactly what you have been doing. And if you are on the Exceed side as a staff engineer, it's just a matter of finding something that is even larger in scope. So instead of influencing your group of your org that's like maybe 50 people, maybe you're influencing across 2 larger orgs, or maybe you're building some new infrastructure that hundreds of engineers are using instead of maybe just like dozens of engineers. So it's just a matter of scaling and taking on more scope, but very similar behaviors.
I want to add just a little bit to that. So before I quit my job at Airbnb, I got Exceeds at the staff level for my last, like for 2020. And here's the perspective that like you want to do to think about like the different projects that I was working on. So if you want to get the staff level, usually, or Exceeds, you're going to want to deliver on like your main meaty project. For me, that was pricing and availability and getting those metrics like really refined, really good. Deliver on your high quality, big rock project. But then you should also be working on designs and discussions for like longer term things. So like one of the things I worked on was this document on how we should build best practices on how to take data from the data lake and put it back into the Airbnb app, and the best practices around that, and getting feedback from principal engineers and all the other engineers like in the company to understand like what kind of edge cases we run into, and what are the different like use cases and patterns that are involved there. And if you can get one of those kind of like higher level architecture impacts, as well as like just the meaty like big rock impact that is like if you don't deliver that, you're not going to even meet expectations. If you can do both of those things, that's how you're going to really get to that next level, that like senior staff sort of level.
That's great. Let's move on to Alan.
My question is related to what seems to be like the most recurring piece of advice beyond just sheer technical skill, which is doing that sort of technical communication, both to people who are non-technical and also people who are technical, as well as building those relationships and mentorship. And I was wondering if you have any advice or resources, books, articles, whatever, that you found helpful for just building that sort of communication and finding mentorship within your org or without your org. That makes sense.
Yeah, I can chime in here quickly. I think one of the core skills of communication is know who you're talking to. So I'll talk about Meta or Facebook, which is where I was for almost 5 years. They're a workplace group. And so one thing that I did before I posted so Workplace is basically like an internal version of Facebook. You would post updates about your work and keep people informed. And so one thing I would do before I posted anything is I would look through the membership and say, hey, is this workplace group primarily other engineers? Is it a leadership team? Is it a cross-functional group of marketers and PMs and engineers? And based on that, you should tailor the level of depth of your communication to accommodate that. I think you have to be really careful not to go too deep in the weeds or too light on the detail. Either extreme is not good, depending on who you're talking to. And so a core part of it is, number one, research who is in the stand-up or the meeting or the workplace group that you're addressing. And number two, understand how much do they know? If there's like a PM that you're talking to, how much do they actually know about your work? How much do they care? And based on that, you should accommodate or message differently. I don't really have a book or a video recommendation off the top of my head. I will say just talking to people again is really important to you, because you want to have some empathy for where are they coming from? What are they trying to get done? And the way you do that is, again, going back to what we talked about for 15 minutes, is relationship building. Understand who they are and how you can help them. And then if you do that enough, you get a good sense of the different personas that you're talking to.
I think one thing that I just want to add real quick is one thing that I noticed that was this weird, unexpected synergy for me when I was working at Airbnb was, when I worked at Airbnb, I made a LinkedIn post almost every single day. And one of the things that you'll learn about the LinkedIn algorithm is that it really rewards conciseness. And if you can tell people dense information in the most concise way possible, that is a very powerful skill. And it's even more than like the level of detail, but even if you have the level of detail, can you say it in a way that is still concise but detailed? That is another thing that I would highly recommend that you can learn to grow from. But that's another great way to learn.
Let's move on to Satish.
Hi, thank you, Rahul, for doing all of this. So my question is, you have talked about a lot about how impact staff careers can bring in, but I am a senior software engineer. I want to become a tech lead soon. I want to ask you, like, what will be my progress if I want to go to tech lead first and then probably staff engineer later?
Yeah, I can speak a little about this. It's interesting that you mentioned tech lead as its own level separate from senior and staff, because I view tech lead as a set of behaviors that can happen cross level. So there are senior engineers that work on teams that are tech lead. They lead smaller projects, but they do everything that you'd expect from a tech lead. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but if you're trying to grow from senior, you can take a look at like your specific companies like leveling system. And I think you'll see that a lot of companies, tech leadership is just like a set of behaviors that is orthogonal the level at your company.
I just want to cut in real quick. I think that if what you're missing, if you've gotten feedback and what you're missing on promotion is some of these leadership things and some of these visibility things, maybe being a tech lead will put you in a position to do more of that. But it doesn't mean it's a stepping stone necessarily. Like you doing those behaviors and being a strong tech lead does not mean, that you're on your way to staff necessarily.
Yeah, this also shouldn't be like something that's a mystery to anyone. Like Ryan said, there should be a leveling system at your company where behaviors are clearly defined for each level, and you should be able to look at it and have a conversation with your manager about where you're exceeding and where you're deficient. None of us will be able to tell you exactly what all of those behaviors are. Most companies, there's some standards, but it might be a little bit different. And if you don't know that for your company, that's a really good place to start and ask for that documentation, because you can only guess. You really need to get that outlined for you.
Let's do one last question before we each give our concluding remarks. Samrud?
Hi guys, nice talking to you all. Thanks for doing this. I'm a big fan of Zach. Data engineering is my thing. So I want to know one thing, Zach, from you. So I've been working in data engineering for 5 years now. So one thing is I'll be working under a different manager. My project manager is different and my line manager and the whole setup is different where I am reporting to. So for the performance review, I have to take what all I've done to my manager or the reporting manager. It would be a very tedious task to explain him what I have done since he's not managing me. And as a data engineer, most of the things I'll coding and all the backend work, this can be applicable to the backend engineers as well. So I don't, even for the fact that to put something in my portfolio, I don't have anything to show in the front end. So how do you manage this? How do you showcase yourself at the
Great question.
Yeah.
So I got you on this. So part of this is if you don't have a portfolio piece, something shiny or flashy to put in front of people, like part of that is on the data scientist to help you bring that to the end, or the data analyst to give you that front end experience if it's a Viz project. So that's one way that like you can sell yourself. I think another way is like, what are the other downstream impacts? For example, for me, when I worked at Airbnb, one of the big things is I worked on the pricing and availability data sets, which then got put into smart pricing, which is an algorithm that picks prices for Airbnb listings. And that had a very big impact on the business. So that usually there's like your data sets can be sold as they make one of three people make a decision better. It's either they make an executive better at making a strategic decision, they make a data scientist or data analyst better at making a product decision, or they make a machine learning algorithm better at making an automated decision. And if one of those three things is better, there's usually a metric behind like that kind of stuff. Sometimes the analytical work doesn't have as much of a metric because it's more of an increased visibility, but trying to craft a story behind that visibility can be another great thing to do because it will help to show things off that way. And one last thing I would say is that as a data engineer, you always have the optimization metrics that you can look at. Like this pipeline is now 30% faster or 40% faster. Because one of the big things I did at Airbnb for the pricing and availability data sets is I cut their size by 90%. And the whole company could then use a data set that's 10 times smaller. And so that was another way that I sold my impact. But it's a tricky problem because data engineering has that kind of issue where it does fall into the shadows a little bit, and it doesn't have as much of that shiny front end appeal to it. That you can't show it off as much as you can show off a SQL query. I don't know. So I think that'd be my kind of perspective on like how to like sell your impact as a data engineer.
Okay, awesome. So unfortunately, I think we're going to end the questions here. I'm going to start with Ryan, and we're going to ask everyone on the panel to just say, where can people follow up with you? Or if you have any concluding remarks, Ryan, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul, for doing the question asking and organizing everything. That was really awesome. Thanks so much to my fellow panelists. It was great meeting all of you. I see you all on LinkedIn, but this is the first time actually putting a face to the name. So it's really great. And I really appreciate everyone listening. And just the showing was really awesome. I feel like I always just interact through like comments and stuff. So this was really welcome interaction. Where you can follow me at mainly post on LinkedIn. And then the other thing that I do is I write Substack, which kind of has a lot of content about software engineering, career growth, and all that. I'll put the link in the chat there. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, Ryan's Substack is pure, just solid gold, by the way. So
It's
that's
so good.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Definitely subscribe to that.
I'll pass it to Zach.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming to this. I'm like amazed that we were able to get like 200. I think we were at peak and we're at like 260 people in here. It's freaking nuts.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Twitter. I do Reels as well, Reels and TikToks. So if you want to get me there too, that's great. I'm finally understanding Reels and TikToks. They are a weird one. And yeah, I do Substack as well. That's where I do more long form data engineering stuff. I'm mostly talking about data engineering right now, but in the future, in the next 6-ish months, I'm going to be doing more software engineering content as well, and like software engineering data product content. Like similar, if y'all ever read the book, Designing Data Intensive Applications, I want to build boot camps that teach that in a very applied way. But anyways, I have the 2 domains that I would recommend y'all check out. I have exactly.substack.com. That's for my Substack. And then I have dataengineer.io. And that's going to be more of my boot camp product. I bought the domain. I spent the money.
How much was that domain? That's a really good domain.
So out
It
there.
was like $7,000. It wasn't really that bad. It honestly was not that bad. Yeah. I'll pass it to Lee.
Yeah, so I write, first off, yes, thanks everyone for coming. This is a great turnout, good questions, everything. It was a great conversation. I have just started, like within the last couple of weeks, a Substack. I've been writing on LinkedIn a lot, but it's a very hard platform for people to discover old content on and such, even though I was like super fastidiously like keeping a link tree up to date for a while. It didn't matter. No one used it. So
Running for a long time, Lee.
yeah, so it's been about a year and I have written a lot of things. So I'm trying to find a way to recycle those and shiny them up potentially on Substack. So come see me. I tossed the link into the chat. You can easily find me on LinkedIn. My name is fairly unique. So yeah, we've got Carly left and Rahul. So Carly, you're up.
Hey, awesome. Hey, everybody. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, Carly Machine Learning. I don't do any content like Zach does. I just mostly post reels that I think that are funny. But I think we all need that in our lives. You can also find me playing Call of Duty. I'm sorry ahead of time for smoking you. Yeah, that's mostly it. Yeah, this was super fun. All right, Rahul.
All right. Yeah. So once again, thank you to everyone who joined and thank you to the panelists. It's so much fun. I feel like we've all interacted online in some async capacity, but it's super fun to see all 4 of you in this more real-time way. I want to say 2 things. One is a piece of advice, and then the other is I want to plug something, right? So in terms of one takeaway, at least for me, is I think the vast majority of people, when they are aiming for staff engineer or any senior engineer, the 99% of engineers are lacking when it comes to relationship building and talking to people. It's not about the code. It's about really figuring out what are the problems, who are the people who are encountering those problems, and how can you solve them. So I think that's, in my opinion, one thing that I really would love for people to take away from this conversation. In terms of plugging stuff, I have a YouTube channel. I have been trying to be better about higher quality content there in terms of like really fit the algorithm. So I'd love for you to give feedback there if you have any. And yeah, LinkedIn is also, I'm pretty active there. So I think that's it. I think we have to have 2 follow-ups. Number 1 is, Zach, we need to hear about your Burning Man saga. And then number 2, if you all are okay with it, maybe we can do like a round 2 of the staff engineer panel in another month or 2. But this is super fun.
All Q&A.
Yeah, whoops, all cute. I'm so down. This is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, cool. Okay, this is super fun. Thank you again to everyone. Have a great evening.
Everybody.
Bye. See you.